Mick Schumacher is currently one of the frontrunners to land the Cadillac F1 seat next year, and it is the perfect opportunity for him. He just needs to land the deal. Across drivers like Valtteri Bottas, Sergio Perez, Zhou Guanyu, and even Yuki Tsunoda, Mick Schumacher sticks out to me. A driver who had all the hype in the world, the skill to back it up, but didn't pan out his first time in F1. I believe Mick has all he needs to become a great in F1. Someone just needs to give him the chance. Being the son of a man who is arguably the greatest to ever partake in the sport of Formula One, there's a level of pressure like no other. Both fans and teams in Formula One were simply less patient with Mick because he had a higher expectation in his performance because of the shoes he had to fill. And Haas was probably the worst possible place he could have gone to try to fix that. Mick's time at Haas in 2021 and 2022 was not the greatest, and fans are quick to point at how it went to discredit Mick's talent. He took quite a while to adjust to Formula One's machinery, which didn't help his case. And he did go on to have quite a few big and expensive crashes, which seem to count out Mick if you just look at them on the surface level. But if you look at his situation as a whole, he wasn't completely at the wrong. In his 2 seasons in Formula One, I'd say only one counted as a proper season of experience. After winning the 2020 F2 title, Mick was given a seat at Haas through the Ferrari Driver Academy to race alongside another rookie, Nikita Mazepin. 2021 was a shit show for Haas, and they did have the worst car by a long mile, which meant Mick didn't really have too many on track battles. The Haas VF21 wasn't even a new car, it was just a modified version of the 2020 car to fit the mandated regulation changes, which they pretty much just chopped off a part of the floor and took a lot of downforce away from the car. Looking back on it, it really is mind boggling how bad this car was. Like, look at some of these clips. Like, I know as F1 fans, we love to hate on Nikita Mazepin, but look at how little effort it takes to get the car to spin. At the end of the day, I find it amazing that Schumacher and Mazepin were able to actually cross the finish line in most of these races with how bad the car really does look to drive. With a negatively modified car that couldn't even come close to sniffing the rear of another car, the only other drivers he really raced against were his teammate Mazepin and the Williams and Nicholas Latifi. You see the issue in that, right? It really caused a bit of a write off of a season because the Haas car never got close to even contesting for a point, with his highest finishing position of 12th in the Hungarian GP, where Valtteri Bottas decided to go bowling and only 13 cars were classified in the race. But it wasn't all that bad. Mick had a few good performances when damage for other cars or rain allowed him to. Looking back to that same Hungarian GP, Mick put on some great defense against Max Verstappen. Now, it is worth mentioning, Verstappen was driving half a car and was still faster than the Haas, but the composure and car placement by Mick was very good. Also, probably the highlight of the season for Mick came in qualifying at the Turkish Grand Prix, where he made it to Q2, the only time the Haas car would make it there all season. It really is shocking how bad this car is and how we got such big celebrations from the team for making it to a Q2 in a wet quali. Regardless, it's hard to count 2021 as a true year of experience for Mick Schumacher, so 2022 was his first real season in F1. Mick took a bit to adjust to the new regulations and had his first bit of actual competitive wheel to wheel racing, and finished 11th in the opener in Bahrain. He then had quite the big crash in the next qualifying in Jeddah, which took him out of entering the race, and then he got very close to scoring his first points in many instances, but just couldn't finish the job. Multiple Q3 appearances and a P6 start in Canada, which ended in an engine failure, made Mick seem so unlucky in being unable to score his first points. But that changed in Silverstone. Starting P19, Mick clawed his way through the pack and finished P8, and he had an incredible battle with Max Verstappen at the end of the race, who did have damage, but still was in the dominant RB18. He then had a career weekend in Austria, qualifying P7 and finishing P6, his highest result yet, and he had an incredibly close wheel-to-wheel battle with Lewis Hamilton. It did somewhat go south from there, though. Mick didn't score points for the rest of the season, and the real nail in the coffin moment was in Brazil. Labeled a make or break race for him to get re signed. He qualified last, and his teammate Kevin Magnussen qualified on pole position. At that moment, Schumacher wasn't re signed for the next season, and with there being no spots left on the grid, he was signed to a reserve driver role at Mercedes for the next 2 years. What I find interesting is that if you exclude the Brazilian GP where Magnussen scored 2 points, Mick actually was finishing around, if not better than Magnussen at most races, but it still wasn't enough for Haas to want to re sign him. Now, I know Mick didn't have the most impressive time at Haas, and he did have some pretty low lows, but his highs were also very high. I think Haas just wasn't the right environment for him. When you really look at it, the reason the 2021 car wasn't good was because Haas couldn't afford it at all. Within the past, having drivers like Grosjean and Magnussen who were experienced, it made sense to have them at a cash-strapped team as they could get consistent results and Haas knows what to expect. But because of how strapped on cash Haas was, they had to resort to two rookies with high financial backing, one because of talent, potential, and his last name, and the other from his dad's money. As rookies, both of these guys just needed to be approached with patience and lenience, which Haas just couldn't afford to give them. They treated both drivers like a temporary fund for long term gain without ever letting them truly push the limit and develop as F1 drivers. Also, they put an insane amount of pressure on Mick in 2022, which was pretty much his first real season to fight for his contract the next year, which wasn't good at all. The added pressure of trying to push the limits and crashing, along with the guilt the team gave him for it, was not a good recipe for a young driver. Anyways, after his Haas career, Mick was dropped from the Ferrari Driver Academy and became a reserve driver at Mercedes. Although we never saw him on track in a race again, he was part of multiple tire tests and had a lot of simulator work that Mercedes credited him very highly for. He also started competing in the World Endurance Championship with Alpine, and he is doing pretty well, to the point that he's gained interest from F1 teams like Alpine, Audi, and now Cadillac. But to be honest, I don't think it had to be this way. Imagine instead of Haas, Mick Schumacher went to the other team Ferrari could have gotten him a seat at, Alfa Romeo. They had a better car, and he would have been alongside Kimi Raikkonen, who he had a good relationship with and could have learned a lot from. And most importantly, Alfa Romeo was an established team that could let him develop properly. I genuinely think with all my heart that Mick Schumacher would still be in F1 and he would be an established driver in the series by now, if that was the decision that was made. But I guess we'll never know. Now, you could get this far into my argument and still disagree with me, which I wouldn't be completely surprised at. But let me make my case as to why a move to Cadillac would be perfect for Mick Schumacher. First, they had the funds. Unlike Haas, as a new team in F1, Cadillac would have the funds to support Mick and let him develop in a way that he wasn't able to before. Secondly, Mick has a lot more experience than he had in his Haas days. With more experience in the sim and tests for Mercedes and racing in WEC, Schumacher has gained a level of maturity that you can't just find in any old rookie. And finally, even though his time in F1 wasn't great, it is experience nonetheless. Regardless of how good or not you think Mick Schumacher did, with his strong performances he did have, he has less uncertainty than a rookie would, which is what Cadillac needs in their first couple of years in the sport. With them not manufacturing their own power units until 2029, the years leading up to that with the Ferrari engine need to help establish the team in the F1 world, and Mick could help do that. Also, Mick does have a big market behind him, which could be a goldmine in the hands of Cadillac. Realistically, a pairing between Mick Schumacher and either Valtteri Bottas or Sergio Perez would be the perfect move for Cadillac and what they should make, in my opinion. It would create the concept of an established veteran with a young talent, but the young talent would have a bit more certainty behind him than any rookie. We've seen plenty of drivers have a slump their first time in F1 and come back stronger. Nico Hulkenberg coming back and getting his podium, Alex Albon returning to Williams and becoming the star of the midfield, and even Felipe Massa taking a year off at Sauber and contesting for championships at Ferrari later. Sure, Mick didn't have a Lewis Hamilton or Max Verstappen like debut, but Haas used him as a cash cow and as a step in time for when they got their financials to a better place, while pressuring him 24/7 to not go beyond the limit, which is what you need to do to excel in F1. All Mick really needs is an opportunity to do something great.